Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar, Nonprofit Cybersecurity Incident Report for 2025 with Matthew Eshleman. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT, and I'll be the moderator today.
My name is Matthew Eshleman. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Community IT. So again, we support about 200 organizations, about 8,000 staffs. And so we've categorized these threats in a couple different categories, from high risk to medium and low risk threats. In the high risk threat category, we have something we call brute force attacks. That's something we really see with organizations that still have on-premise server infrastructure. That number of servers we support continues to really plummet, but we still organizations still have it. And so again, if a server maybe is connected to some cloud resources or has any exposure to the internet at all, we see these types of attacks initiated. Particularly for us, whenever we onboard new organizations, this is one of our specific threat monitors that we turn on. And so whenever we onboard a new organization, it's very often that we'll see these monitors trip because maybe a previous provider had a port open to the internet. They weren't really looking for it. But again, if anything is open to the internet, it does get targeted. So brute force attacks kind of compromise or focus on physical server infrastructure. Compromised accounts, we had 32 of those last year. And then in the single digits, advanced persistent threats. And we did have a couple of cases of wire fraud. Ransomware was 0 again. I think the other thing I'll just call your attention to is just the amount of compromised accounts suspected that we responded to was almost 500. This kind of reflects us adding more tooling to help identify these, but we're also getting a lot of noise. And I think that's one thing we'll flag here in some of the later slides. It's just, there's an increase in attacks, an increase in the noise as well. So whenever we compare this year over year, I think this is like the thing that maybe gives me a little bit of hope is that there's actually some red, right? We actually saw a reduction in a number of the attacks year over year. Most notably, I would say in the confirmed account compromise, right? So we went down from a high of 44 in 2023 down to 32. So again, about a quarter 20% reduction there. We did have more suspected account compromises. Again, a reflection, I think, more security tools that we had in place to monitor logs and kind of alert us to that. We saw a reduction in the advanced persistent threats that we were responding to, and then a reduction in wire fraud again. So even going from 6 to 3, I think that's a mark of success. It's still a relatively low number overall when you kind of put it in perspective, but those 3 wire fraud incidents, were significant to the organizations that impacted them as well. And again, we had kind of nominal numbers in terms of viruses. Malware is kind of in relatively low amount as well. And I think part of that is the sample size, right? So for our customers, we're managing updates, we're deploying antivirus, doing third-party patching, right? We're investing a lot. So for organizations that are making those investments, the endpoint protection is a relatively low risk area.
Without naming names, can you give an example of the advanced persistent threat?
Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of kind of the Chinese and North Korean state actors. So again, they target our clients that do policy work. So we've had a couple cases where, again, that example that I shared about setting up an interview through Zoom, but then the Zoom interview doesn't really work. And so they're like, well, give me your WhatsApp information. I need to send you my WhatsApp and then move it out of, kind of corporately controlled resources into something else, right? So that's something that we see quite a lot of. that kind of attack vector. The other thing we see with advanced persistent threat actors is that they will take names of trusted, analysts at other organizations and then create very sophisticated spoofed accounts of those individuals and then initiate those conversations. And so they don't start off with like, hey, can you click on this? But it's often, hey, I want your input on this paper. We're convening a meeting. We're talking about this resource. And so there'll be a steady buildup of communication with the ultimate goal of, yes, having that Zoom meeting, having that interaction where they can get them to click on a link to open up some software, to do something else to kind of circumvent those controls. Spam, spoofing, spear phishing, all of like the junk email, like just continues to increase year over year. I mean, this is one thing that we do train our clients, like, hey, if you have something suspicious, send it our way, right? This is just stuff that clients have sent to us. Like, this doesn't even represent the things that the spam tools are blocking, right? There wouldn't be a chart big enough, the big enough scale to show how much stuff we're already blocking. This is just kind of the stuff that's getting through. But again, we've got kind of two different scales. The left scale would be the spoofing. So again, 400 or so messages of those are reported. And then kind of the spam, right? The stuff that people, you can unsubscribe, you can block on your own, right? It's just, you don't want it, you can get rid of it. But that number does continue to climb year after year. So what can we see? I don't know, maybe the peak is over in terms of cyber threats. I was, when I was looking at the data, kind of reflecting back on it over the year, it was, oh, hey, like some of the stuff that we are talking about in terms of phish resistant MFA and the, maybe the maniacal focus on security awareness training. I think just how effective I think that is. I think is paying dividends. And I think the other piece around that is I think the staff are aware of wire fraud. I think a lot of organizations, particularly those that do, would say like microfinance or that kind of granting, have been stung in the past. And so I think organizations have improved their financial controls internally. And so they have built not only improved technical protections, but also process improvements to say, if we're going to make a wire change in wire payment information, we call the person from a number we already have, or we have to have a Zoom meeting with the person to confirm this. Like, we don't just do stuff over email as the only way. I think the other piece is that, and we saw it a little bit in the data, right? The new tools are in place that require additional monitoring capabilities. And so for a lot of those account compromises, like, we were able to respond to those because we have tools in place at our clients that alert us when something suspicious is happening, but they still have a pretty high false positive rate. And so one of the things that we're now kind of struggling with is just managing the volume of alerts, right? So we had almost 500 alerts for suspicious logins, but there were only 30, true account compromises. So it's just, I'm glad we knew about it because we can respond quickly, but it does mean that there's a lot of noise that we have to filter out. I think organizations, again, are taking that step to invest in their protection. And there's a lot of great tools, right? So even a couple of years ago, I would say that area was pretty immature. But now I feel like we've got really great cybersecurity protection tools available to help guard against the most common threats, like spam and email-based attacks. There's really good tools that we can implement to help protect against that. And the same thing with cloud identity protection. There's really good tools now to help identify, monitor, even proactively block whenever something suspicious seems to be happening. And then I think there is an opportunity, again, for protection needs to expand beyond the boundaries of work. So I think we had a blog post to talk a little bit about some things that you can do to protect your own kind of personal digital identity, because that does seem to be at risk more and more, particularly in those kind of focused organization sectors. So it's not all necessarily doom and gloom, and I always like to talk about, well, what can we do to protect your organization? And really comes back to that policy foundation. So again, if organizations have not taken that step already, or maybe have a policy that was adopted a while ago and hasn't been updated, that's a good opportunity to start. IT acceptable use, just kind of that general framework, right? Incident response. And I think this is one it's important for organizations to have. Community IT as your IT partner. We have our incident response policy, right? That's what we do. Whenever you tell us you have an incident, but organizations need to have that for themselves as well. What do we do? Calling your IT provider is part of that, but there's probably other things that you need to do as an organization beyond just talking to your IT partner. AI acceptable use. Again, there's lots of great AI policies. I think the challenge for them is not the policy itself, but it's the implementation, governance, and ongoing support. Having that disaster recovery or disaster response plan, and then data retention policy. I will just kind of say that this is something we're seeing organizations be more attentive to, particularly in the last couple of months. Just how much data are we retaining, particularly on email, and making sure that if we say, hey, we're going to keep data for a year or 18 months or 2 years, that those policies are then followed up with the mechanism to actually purge out data after those times. Again, security awareness training, we're big fans of that. It doesn't need to take up a lot of time, but it needs to be part of the culture of the organization. It also gives you an opportunity to talk about security at your staff meetings, results, fish tests, right? All those things I think are important and just help to build a culture of security. For organizations, I think fish-resistant MFA is a big thing to focus on. It doesn't necessarily need to be everybody in the organization. It's a little bit of a higher lift than kind of the MFA that we all have in our pockets. But it's an important step, particularly for folks in the finance, IT, maybe in HR, people that maybe have access to more sensitive information. As we've seen, spam and spoofing, like that is kind of the biggest threat organizations face. It's where a lot of the attacks start, right? There's clickjacking, all that stuff really starts in email. So if we can reduce that, I think that reduces the surface area for attack. And so a third-party email filtering tool is really important to help protect against that. The same as cloud identity protection. Again, this is a new maybe solution area that has really matured in the last year or so. And so now there's really good tools that worth leveraging that have a much lower false positive rate that can help identify like, hey, this suspicious cloud account doesn't look right. Like we're going to lock it automatically, or alert, have built-in alerting rules to help protect against those account compromises. And then finally, right, the basics, patching, updating your computer, right? It's all kind of boring. Restarting your computer once a week, like that's actually a great security thing that you can do. Doesn't take much time, but it's important because it helps all those security updates get applied and keep your device secure.
We do have our community IT cyber offerings. That's at communityit.com/cybersecurity. You can find kind of how we think about it and what we offer, and also a bunch of free resources as well that I've been sharing here in chat, and I'll put in the transcript. And of course, they're on our site. You'll also find the link to schedule some time with Matt there to grab some time and talk to him about your cybersecurity questions, or if you need an assessment. We do have a monthly webinar series. So next month, it's going to be May 28th. I'm going to be talking with Nuruddin Aboki about IT essentials for your nonprofit in these challenging times. He's going to talk with us about making the hard choices in our current climate and facing challenges with your essential IT intact. Talk about governance that helps you manage risks and how to budget wisely. We'll also talk about in-house versus outsourcing IT and where you can find some value there, especially if you're facing staffing cuts or major disruptions in your programs or your funding. And we'll talk about how you keep your IT lights on in the midst of changes to your nonprofit. And also, how do you maintain a healthy workplace with all of this mounting stress as we're continuing to deal with all these challenges? So that'll be at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific on Wednesday, May 28th. And I'm going to share the link for that as well. You can register for it right now. It's just going to be on Zoom. We really appreciate you joining us for these monthly webinars. We love sharing our information and resources with the community. And I just love the chat today. It was really active. People were sharing ideas and information. So Matt, if you can stay on for a minute or two, and if the people in the Zoom can stay on, we have a couple of questions for you. So I do want to go back over our learning objectives. If we were going to learn about a basic approach to cybersecurity, the trends and the attacks and the organization protections that we saw in 2024 and beginning in 2025 as everything is changing. We wanted to understand evolving security best practices and learn the role of governance policy and training in protecting your nonprofit from these common scams and from new scams that are coming up, right? So we're hoping that you'll hear about it here, be able to train your staff on it before they see it in the wild and they see the, paste jacking or the other types of new scams that are coming through. So I hope that was helpful. If you want to go back another one, we'll go to Q&A. And I want to make sure that if we have Q&A questions in the room as well, we can ask those. But there were a couple in the chat. One is, do you have any advice for communicating these threats and individual responsibility against cyber attacks with staff, especially if you're not getting responses, folks aren't reading their emails, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge. And I think it's something that really starts from the top. When we talk about security awareness training, it's something that whenever we kick it off, we ask for time in a staff meeting and we ask to be introduced by the executive director. It's something that really starts at the top and is something that everybody needs to be involved in. And so if your organization, if your executive director or your operations staff are like, security awareness training is something for everybody else, but we're not going to participate in it, you're probably not going to be successful. So I think fortunately with our clients, we are really seeing executive directors and leadership understand the risks that it presents to their organization. And so they are in favor of it. I think communication does need to be kind of multi-channel, right? You can't just rely on email alone. And again, that's why whenever we kick off our security awareness training, it's a meeting that we do. It's part of a staff meeting. So there's an in-person element, there's email follow-up. And then something that we do is, whenever clients report phishing messages to us, from time to time, we want to report back and kind of provide some feedback. So again, I think it needs to be kind of a multi-channel approach, so that they're not just hearing it kind of one time, once a year, but security awareness training and security education needs to be something that is really infused to the organization on a regular basis, just as part of the ongoing conversation that's happening at your organization.
Yeah, I think that is something that sometimes when you have the employee handbook on the first day or two that you're at your organization and then you never hear about it again, that's not a good situation. So you want to make sure that it's ongoing. But then, you do have to be careful about it becoming all the time and try to enlist your staff as part of your army. They're protecting your organization and they care about it enough to work for your organization. So hopefully they can take that to heart. We have another question. Do you have any thoughts on Microsoft saying that passkeys are the future of authentication and they're going to be eliminating passwords and two-factor authentication?
I think it's great, because it helps eliminate. I think Microsoft is doing it because they have the data that they can see just how many account compromises are occurring. I think they've been, exploited in that attacker in the middle, methodology. And so I think they are working to provide more secure ways to provide access to information. And so I think as organizations can make that switch into passkeys, again, that kind of combines a more physical connection to that authentication, right? So in the attacker in the middle example, the problem is that authentication token can be moved, right? So it works on this device, but then somebody halfway across the world can still use it to authenticate. Passkeys are tied to physical devices. And so, in the same scenario in the attacker in the middle, right? If you would click on that, you had a passkey, that authentication is bound to the device that you are on, and it cannot be moved and kind of used somewhere else. So, I think they're doing a lot of innovation. They're, kind of dragging some people kicking and screaming into that, but I do think it's a good step to take, and it's needed. We can see it from the data, right? Even with MFA, there's a lot of account compromises that are still occurring. and that we can actually prevent through some of the improved technology controls. So the question is, should we remove staff information from your website? And I would say it depends on kind of your organization's maybe risk tolerance and kind of the sector that you're in. I think in general, bad guys are using it to know more about your organization. Threat actors are like, oh, here's the people on the board, here's the executive leadership, here's the accounts payable person. I'm going to use that information to create a compelling email to say, oh, the board member needs this access, or here's the invoice for these executive services for this person. So I think in general, publicly available information is used by threat actors for primarily financial schemes. I think the organizations that we have seen take the steps to remove personal information from websites have been those that are getting like those, like just vitriolic personal attacks. That's more like targeted at those. Immigration is something that we've seen a lot, refugee, asylum, LGBTQIA. So those people are kind of targeted more kind of for that direct personal attacks, in addition to just the financial fraud stuff that just kind of occurs. So again, I think that's something that organizations need to be aware of, and it's probably a risk tolerance conversation that needs to happen. So,
Do you have more questions? Any other questions? No? All right. Well, in that case, Matt, I think we will finish up. I want to thank you so much for your time today in person. We got to ask you our questions. And thank you everyone who joined us through Zoom. We really appreciate it. We love doing these monthly webinar series. So I'm going to let you get back to your day. Thanks for staying over a minute or two with us if you were able to. And I hope to see you next month for that webinar on essential IT in challenging times. So we'll come back and join us, and we'll talk about how we're all going to get through this together. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.